various disagreements about the menorah, the physical menorah, and then we were going to come back to those disagreements and reinterpret them the way they apply in the spiritual soul of every person. In other words, for example, there is going to be a disagreement of how the menorah stood. Did the menorah stand from north to south or from east to west? Right? The menorah has 7 branches, 6 branches emerging from one stem. Those 6 branches, are they against the length of the Mishkan or against the width of the Mishkan? If it's against the length of the Mishkan, it's east to west. If it's against the width of the Mishkan, it's north to south. Very interesting disagreement in the Talmud. Now, when I sit here and I say, what is the significance to me? What's the difference how the menorah stood? North to south or south to east? Or north to south, or east to west? What's the difference if it was against the length of the Mishkan or against the breadth of the Mishkan? What's the difference? So what the Rebbe does is explains that there is a tremendous ramification. The placement of the menorah the 2 opinions about the placement of the menorah reflect 2 opinions of what the spiritual idea of a menorah is. And that disagreement of what the spiritual purpose of the menorah is, that expresses itself in this disagreement of how the menorah was physically placed. And this is just one example. I'm holding a book in my hand, which is, which is 138 pages. 138 pages, not that big, but it's 138 pages. And this is what they call Rishimat HaMenorah. It's a essay that the Rebbe wrote about the menorah. Now, he wrote it for himself in his own personal diary. It wasn't published. It was hidden throughout his lifetime. Nobody knew where, no one ever heard about it or saw it. But after the Rebbe's passing, they found in the Rebbe's desk 3 notebooks full of his handwritten diaries, about thoughts of Torah that he wrote before he even became Rebbe in the 20s, 30s, and 40s of the 20th century, 1920s, 30s, and 40s. And amongst them, there's this book about the menorah. And this is an analytical essay that analyzes all the disagreements about the physical menorah, how it stood and what placement they were, etc. And then, like I said, once again, goes and explains their spiritual equivalent. And this was right up, the style of the Rebbe's studying Torah, because the Rebbe felt that all parts of Torah are interconnected. The body of Torah, the law, and the soul of Torah, the spiritual explanations, are not 2 separate genres, but it's like your body and your soul, which unite. So every time the Rebbe studied any part of Torah, the first question is, what's the lesson? What's the spiritual equivalent? And here is a sampling, the way the Rebbe does it to the menorah. Like I said, 190 pages in the way it's printed in this book, 140 pages the way it's printed in this book. And of course, we have about a half an hour left. So we're going to give a little sampling and a little tasting of this idea. So what I'm trying to say is we should look out for 2 things. One thing to look for is, again, that the first point is, look how every detail of the menorah, every detail of the temple has a spiritual equivalent in the life of every person. That's specific to our topic. But then in general, and this can be extrapolated to any part of Torah that you study, it may seem that the Talmud is getting caught up with minute details and arguments about things that are seemingly irrelevant. But the reality is that every detail in the Torah has spiritual relevance, and it seems small and seems minor, but behind these disagreements, there lies a lot of significance. So that's introduction number 2. One more introduction is in place, of course, and that is, I forgot the 3rd introduction. What was the 3rd introduction? I forgot. Okay, must be not that important. Okay, so let's start drilling in. The first thing we want to think about is, we know that the menorah had 7 candles, and that's wonderful. The problem, amongst these 7 candles, there is one candle that is unique. Okay, and how so? So if you look in the book of Leviticus, chapter 24. Why don't we open it up? Why not? You don't want to, I don't want you to trust me. Let's open up. Give me just a second.
Rabbi, while you're looking, can I ask a question?
Of course.
Now, one of the big three no-nos in Judaism is idol worship, right?
Yes.
And here again, I think you've mentioned it in your classes before, creation is like 40 psukim in Genesis, and the creation of the ark, the tabernacle is several chapters, if not parshiot. And here we're talking about the menorah and the Mishkan and all this, and we're bowing down to it, and we're considering it reverential. Is this a form of idol worship? Or?
So that's an excellent question. That's a fascinating question. And I thank God I have a good answer, not because it's my answer, but because it's a good answer. So it's not my answer. That's why it's good, is what I'm trying to say. So Rabbi Shamshon Raphael here addresses your question. And he says something that I find fascinating. And he says that all pagan faiths and many other faiths have images. And the Torah says, never make an image of God. Lo ta'aseh lecha pesel, never make an image. That's like the one most important commandment in the Torah. You can't make an image of God. You can't make anything that will be a symbol of God. Because if it's a symbol of God, it's not a symbol of God, because God has no symbols, because God is infinite, and something that's infinite cannot be described. And if you think you can describe it, it's not God. Okay. So now the question becomes, why is it that the Torah has, that we see that seems like there are symbols in the Torah, and some of the symbols are in the altar, specifically symbols connected to the temple. In fact, right after the 10 Commandments, God says, don't make any images. And then immediately after, he starts talking about how to make the altar. Now, why isn't the altar an image? Why isn't it an image of something that we like you say, Bob? It's holy. We revere it. So why isn't that a contradiction to the commandment not to make idols, not to make a symbol? And what Rabbi Shamshon Raphael here says, I think, is absolutely fascinating. He says, while other faiths make a symbol, and the symbol is a symbol of God to describe God, in our faith in Judaism, all the symbols that you will find in the temple have nothing to do with God. It's not a symbol about God. It's a symbol about what we need to do, how we have to become, how we have to improve. And you'll see in a moment how the menorah is case in point. But you could say about any other vessels. What is an altar? An altar is how you have to raise yourself. And that's why we have the discussion. I think we discussed it a few weeks ago, about you cannot have steps, you have to have a ramp. That tells us how we elevate ourselves and we come close to God. And the same thing is about all the vessels of the temple and all the symbolism and all the symbols of the what we derive from what the actual materials used for the temple represent, what the coverings represent, and so on and so forth. I hope to send out something today about the colors of the coverings of the temple and what they represent. But what you'll find in common about all of this is that this has nothing to do with God. In other words, it's about how we need to position ourselves to become close to God, but it's not a symbol of God. So I think that's an excellent question. I think it's a good answer. That's just a man's opinion here.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay, so let's look at the temple at the menorah for a second, and let's think about. We'll jump right in because we're running out of time here already. Let's think. Oh, what was I going to say? Okay, I forgot. Yeah, I want to show you the verse. The Ner Ma'aravi. We first have to establish the Western candle. So let's find the verse. Okay, so here we have. I wonder if Rashi says something. Oh, I love Rashi. Rashi's the man. Okay, let's read a verse or two, then we'll read the Rashi, then we can start getting into the confusion. So Leviticus chapter 24, the portion of Emor, which discusses the commandments to the priests. And the Lord spoke to Moses saying, command the children of Israel, and they shall take to you pure olive oil, crushed for lighting, to kindle the lamps continually. Now, this is a terrible, terrible, terrible translation. Okay, why is it so terrible? Now, I know why they're doing it. They're doing it so you should be able to continue to verse 3. But in reality, it is a bad translation. Why? The verse says, Lahalot ner tamid. Anybody that knows Hebrew would tell you that ner is not lamps. Ner, lamps is plural. Ner is singular. So what it says is, what it really says in reality, command the children of Israel, and they shall take to you pure olive oil, crushed for lighting, to kindle the lamp continually. Now this begs the question, why the lamp? Why not the lamps? So whoever translated this solved the problem for you. He just added an S and made it plural and solved the problem. But God was asleep at the wheel, because if he was paying attention, he would have written Lahalot nerot tamid, candles in the plural. But no, it says so in the singular. How come? So that's a problem. Let's read one more verse. Outside the dividing curtain of the testimony in the tent of meeting, in other words, we're not talking about in the innermost chamber, but in the outer chamber, Aaron shall set it up before the Lord from evening until morning continually. This shall be an eternal statute for your generations. That's why, so the bottom line is, the candle lights from evening to morning, which is another set of a problem. This creates another set of problems. Does the candle light from evening until morning? In other words, verse 3 implies that the candles only light at night. The problem is verse 2, it says continually. Halot ner tamid, the candle runs always. So what do you do with these two problems that I mentioned? Number one, why does it say ner tamid, eternal lamp, continual lamp in the singular? It should have said candles in the plural or lamps in the plural. And the second verse, it says from evening to morning. Is it from evening to morning, or is it 24/7? So Rashi says as follows. It's bothering me. So Rashi says as follows. The dividing curtain of testimony, which was situated in the front of the ark, which was called the testimony ha'edut. We'll leave that alone. And our rabbis expounded that ha'edut alludes to the western lamp, which was testimony to all the creatures on earth that the Shekhinah, the divine presence, rested upon Israel. For the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, would place in it the same amount of oil he placed into the other lamps, and from it he would begin the candling, and with it he would finish the cleaning, since it continued to burn miraculously until the following evening. Okay, what do we see from here? We see from here that what does verse 2 say? There's a continual lamp. Why lamp and not lamps? Why in the singular? Well, the answer is simple. Because only one lamp lit always. Even though the menorah had 7 lamps, but only the westernmost candle lit all the time. Now, Rashi says there was a miracle. They put the same amount of oil and it lasted 24 hours. But even if there was no miracle in the periods that there was no miracle, like in the second temple, they still nevertheless would keep adding oil. In the morning, they would add oil to the westernmost candle, and the westernmost candle would burn continually. So we solved both problems. We know why it says in the singular to burn continually, because we're only talking about the westernmost candle. And we also know why the next verse, verse 3, says the candles burn from evening to morning, because that's all the other candles except for the westernmost candle, Ner HaMa'aravi, the westernmost candle. Now, so that's point one. That's one idea. And okay, beautiful. Everything is fine. And I was going to say that's why there's many shuls. I don't know. I think it's primarily Ashkenaz, but Bob, you'll correct me. The shuls that have in the front of the shul, they have a ner tamid, they have an everlasting candle, a continual candle. The continual candle comes from this verse, and it's you have a light in the front of the shul that burns continually, and that is supposed to remind us of the westernmost candle in the temple that burned continually. You don't have a whole menorah up there because the only one that burned continually was the westernmost candle. So Chabad, it's not our custom. I don't know why. I know for sure it's an Ashkenaz custom. It may be a Sfarad custom as well. Bob, please help us if you know. Otherwise we continue because that's not critical to this point. Okay. So westernmost candle, wonderful. How complicated could this be? The answer is it's at least a three-way argument. What on earth is the westernmost candle? Only Jews can do this. What is the westernmost candle? So the first thing I want to say is that we have to look at the temple and look at. So again, this primarily there's two opinions how the menorah stood, right? So again, you walked into the temple. Let me see if I can find a picture that will help us clarify. If we already have Zoom, we may as well enjoy the benefits of technology if we're not sitting together. What do we got here? Okay, so this is a sample of the temple. It's not a perfect sample. There's a lot of problems here, but this is the innermost chamber behind where I'm pointing. That's where the ark was. This is the outer chamber. I walk in, I see the incense altar, I see the menorah, I see the table on the right side. Now, the menorah here, so when I walk in, I'm facing west. I'm walking from the east to the west. The length of the temple is east to west. Where was the menorah? Was the menorah the way it is in this picture, where the 7 branches are going north to south? Or was it east to west? So the answer is, or in other words, was it facing the length of the temple, east or west? Or was it the width of the temple, north to south? So the answer is, of course, like everything else in Judaism, it must be a disagreement. Okay? So we have a disagreement. Who are the opinions? Rabbi Yehuda, the prince, the author of the Mishnah, says that the menorah was not the way it is in this picture. The menorah was east to west. Rabbi Eliezer says, no, it was from north to south. In other words, its width was based on the width of the temple. The width of the menorah, the length of the menorah was on the width of the temple, as opposed to Rebbe, who says, no, the menorah stood from east to west, that the length of the menorah was against the length of the temple, unlike this picture. Okay, but let's start with this picture here. We know, all the sages agree, there's a westernmost candle. Please, ladies and gentlemen, could you please help me identify the westernmost candle? Where's there a westernmost candle? If they're east to west, all candles are equally west. So this is a problem. So, Rabbi Eliezer, go ahead. So when Rabbi Eliezer says that the menorah stands from east to west, from north to south, the way it is in this picture, he now has to clarify, what does he mean? What is the westernmost candle? So what he does is, he says, look, the westernmost candle is the middle candle. You see the menorah, if you could see, there's one stem, and then there are 3 branches that branch out of each stem, branch out of the middle stem, and you end up with 6 candles plus the stem. So he says the stem, the central candle is the westernmost candle. Why is it westernmost? In what way is it westernmost? So he says like this. All the other candles, they would take the wick, and the wick would face, they would push the wick toward facing the middle candle. Because it says that says elsewhere in the Torah, El mul pnei ha-menorah ya'iru shivat hanerot, the 7 candles should face the face of the menorah, whatever that means. He says, Rabbi Eliezer says, what that means is you take the wick of all 6 candles, and the wick points to the middle candle. However, the middle candle, you take the wick of the middle candle and you point it toward the Holy of Holies, and you point it toward west. So in that sense, you have 3 candles. So you have all the candles facing the middle, and the middle candle facing west, and that's why it's the westernmost candle. Okay, does that work for you? Is that creative? It's certainly a creative solution. Now we get to something that should be simple. According to the opinion that says that the menorah stood not the way it is in this picture, but it stood north to south, according to that opinion, it stood east to west. The length of the menorah ran according to the length of the temple, According to that opinion, seemingly the westernmost candle should be the easiest to identify. What's the westernmost candle? The candle closest to the west. But that would be too simple. And the Jews never do anything simple. So there's a disagreement. One opinion is Maimonides, and he says the straightforward opinion, the westernmost candle, according to the opinion that says that the menorah stood east to west, is the westernmost candle. But then almost all other early commentators, Rashi and many others, disagree with Maimonides, and they say something very counterintuitive. What they say is that the westernmost candle, is you ready? Imagine you have 7 candles. What's the westernmost candle? Again, I'm sorry. I keep saying the westernmost. That's the wrong translation. It's the western candle. What's the western candle, according to Rashi? Not the one closest to the west. But Rashi says it's the second one. When I enter the temple, candle 1, candle 2. Candle 1 is eastern candle. Western candle is the second candle. That's very surprising. Why is the western one the second candle? Because it's the first one that could be called west. Why is it the first one could be called west? Because the first one cannot be called west because that's the easternmost. So right after number 1, which is the eastern, the second one could already be considered the western candle. So according to Rashi, the western candle is candle 2. According to Rambam, which is more straightforward, the western candle is candle number 7. Now I'm going to illustrate it. I think we have a thing on Chabad Rog where we could show this just to make it easier to follow. Okay, so this is an essay that describes a lot of this. Okay, so let's talk about according to the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer, this is the Holy of Holies. This is the menorah. You got 7 candles. It's going from north to south. The length of the menorah based on is equivalent to the width of the temple. So what does Rabbi Eliezer say? What is the western candle? The center one, the middle one. Why is it the western? It's not any closer to the west than all the other ones because all the other wicks are facing the center, whereas the central wick is facing the west. Okay, that's simple. Now we get to the opinion which should be simple, the opinion that says that the menorah stood from east to west. So seemingly, the western candle would be the one closest to west, and that indeed is the opinion of Maimonides, the western lamp according to Maimonides. And however, Rashi and many others believe that the western candle is not, the western light, less western candle is not the last one, but it's the second one. Why is it the second one? The first one is the eastern candle. The next one is the western candle. Okay, so we managed to make something so simple as what is the western candle. We managed to complicate it. So we have at least 3 opinions of what the western candle is, depending on the disagreement of which way the menorah is facing. Now, you could spend hours and hours and hours analyzing all the opinions and why they say what they say and what's the biblical sources and why they say what they say, which is exactly what the Rebbe does. We're going to skip all of that. And we're going to try to start unpacking what is the spiritual significance, what is at the heart of this disagreement, what is at stake here, and what does the menorah represent according to both opinions. And then we want to figure out what's the westernmost candle. What does all this have to do in the spiritual life of the Jew, which is a lot to unpack. But in the meantime, if anybody has any questions, if this is not clear because it's very detailed, if you have any questions, please share. Otherwise, we go and we start. I can't guarantee we'll cover everything today. Maybe we'll do a little next week, we'll see, but at least we'll start unpacking today. I'm going to give the big idea and then we'll see how detailed we can get.
I have a question.
Yes.
Was that candle used to light all other candles?
Yes. So either it lit miraculously or they would actually add oil. Now, if they would add oil in the morning, it depends. Some people say they took it from it's not so clear. Some people say they took it they actually took the fire from the mizbeach, from the altar. But if it lasted, either way, the Talmud says mimena haya matchil. They would begin from the westernmost candle. What order would you light? You would begin from the westernmost. Now again, what's from the western candle? Again, it's so funny. What's western candle? Either the center candle or the closest to the west or the second from the east.
So if that's the case, what is the parallel to the Hanukkah menorah when you always light from the center?
Hanukkah menorah is different. Hanukkah menorah is not really celebrating the exact replica. We're not allowed to make an exact replica. Hanukkah menorah, more than anything else, is celebrating the number 8. And it's different than the temple menorah in significant ways. But so these are some of the problems that we have. Like I said, in the Rebbe's essay, there's 100 pages analyzing just the law, like why does Rashi and Rambam disagree, etc. And then the second half is the spiritual. We're going to go to the spiritual right away. So, but agree with me, please agree with me that only Jewish people can have a 3-way disagreement of what the Western candle is. I mean, this is unbelievable. Okay, so here we go. The big discussion that we have is whether or not the first disagreement, the first thing we want to analyze is whether or not the menorah stood from east to west or from north to south. That is the first discussion we have to deal with. What's the difference? Who cares if it stands east to west or north to south? Like on the top, north to south or east to west? So what Hasidic philosophy tells you is, depending on what the menorah represents, that will determine how you place the menorah. And we have 2 choices what the menorah represents. There's 2 schools of thought. Now, this was going to be my third introduction, by the way. In reality, the menorah either stood north to south or east to west. You can't be placed both in the same time. But in spirituality, we know that both opinions are true. So in our spiritual life, we could have both menorahs, one menorah north to south and one menorah east to west. Because spiritually speaking, we know both opinions are true. Both are the words of Hashem. Both are valid opinions in Torah. So although in reality, they had to choose one, but when we study this, both can be true. We can have a menorah in our life north to south, north to south, or east to west. So that was the third very important introduction. Okay, so what does the menorah represent? And there are 2 schools of thought, which would then determine how it's placed. Okay, one opinion, and we'll start with the first opinion that says north and south. One opinion is the menorah represents the Torah. A person menorah represents spiritual light. In our life, we need spiritual light. And the spiritual light is the Torah. Now, why are there 7 branches of the menorah? Let me find you a picture of the menorah. Nice picture of the menorah. Oh, these are bad pictures. These are not pictures. These are pictures that are according to the other opinion. Just hang on 1 second. I apologize. I have to.
Rabbi, while you're looking, quick question. So we're assuming that there are no pictures of the of how it was.
No, we have one picture of the menorah in Rome on the gate of Titus, which is controversial. The Rebbe believed that's not an authentic picture. In other words, it's an authentic picture, but it doesn't depict the menorah of the temple that was the mitzvah. There were other menorahs in the temple. It's possible that the Romans took the wrong picture, but that's another story. But yeah, there's no opinion. There's no source. There's no historical source that tells us exactly how it stood. If there were, there would be no disagreements. But okay, I apologize. I don't like to stop studying Torah for anything, but this is also a mitzvah because my mother texted me, so that comes first. It's in the 10 Commandments. What am I going to do? Menorah ba'alachsan. Okay, this is a nice menorah that we like. This is the menorah that we like. This is the menorah. Actually, let's look at this menorah. This menorah is fun. This menorah is fun. Whoops. This menorah is fun because who drew this menorah, if you know? This menorah is the hand-drawn menorah of Maimonides. Maimonides drew this menorah. This is why the Rebbe says that the menorah is not round, but it's on an angle, because this is the menorah Maimonides drew. Okay, it's not perfect drawing, as his son writes, because really the candle should be all the way up on top, but this is the general outline, and Maimonides' son, Rabbi Avraham, said that some of these points that the general outline is correct. Okay, so we have 6 branches of the menorah. What do we know about the Torah? The Torah has 2 parts. The Torah has the written Torah and the oral Torah. The oral Torah comes from the stem. It's based on the written Torah. There's no oral Torah without the written Torah. The written Torah is the Bible, 5 books of Moses. And then the oral Torah branch out of the written Torah. Now, it happens to be that the oral Torah has 6 branches. Why are there 6 branches? Because the Mishnah, which is the first time the code of law, the oral Torah was codified, the Mishnah is divided into 6 sections. The 6 orders of the Mishnah, because Torah law is divided into 6 categories. To run them by quickly, Zraim is all the laws about seeds, about planting, about agriculture. Moyed is all about times, all about the holidays. Then you have Nashim, which is women, all about the laws about marriage, divorce, etc. Then you have, it's a good one, Zraim, Moyed, Nashim. Nizikim is damages, torts. People damage each other. That's the 4th section. The 5th section is Kadshim, the holy, which means the sacrifices in the temple. And the 6th is Taharot, the laws of purity and impurity. So the entire Torah is divided into 6, oral Torah is divided into 6 sections. Says the Hasidic philosophy, what does the Torah represent? You have the spiritual light that comes 6 branches stemming from a single branch. And therefore, all of the 6 branches stem from the middle branch. So what's the menorah? The menorah is a symbol of the Torah. We should implement the Torah in our life, and that will bring us light. So why 6 branches? 6 branches is 6 orders of the Mishnah, and the central branch is the written Torah, which is the stem where the oral Torah comes from. How beautiful. Now, if you say that the written Torah is that the menorah represents the menorah represents the Torah, then you believe that the Torah should be placed, that the menorah should be placed east to west. Why? I'm sorry, north to south. Why? Because in the Torah, in the temple, the more west you went, the more holy you were, because the Holy of Holies were in the west. Imagine if you put the Torah north to south, you put the menorah north to south. Then some parts of the Torah are closer to holiness than others. That would be absurd, right? Because every part of Torah is truth. Every part of Torah is God's word. There's no one part of Torah that's holier than another part of Torah. So because this opinion believes that the menorah represents Torah. Therefore, they say you cannot put one more closer to the west than the other. And therefore, Rabbi Eliezer says the menorah is east to west. Now, what's the westernmost candle? The westernmost candle is the written Torah. And the written Torah, the light is facing the west, because when you study the written Torah, you see clearly how it was handed from Hashem. The written Torah is the sages discussing. So it's derived from the written Torah. But the written Torah is much closer is facing the ark, because we say the written Torah was handed directly from Hashem, as opposed to the oral Torah, which Hashem gives us the principles, and we derive it from the central stem. Beautiful. Everything is fine. So now we know what the Torah is, what the menorah is, according to the opinion that says it runs north to south. What about the other opinion that says that the menorah runs east to west? So now what does the menorah represent? So according to this opinion, the menorah runs east to west. According to this opinion, the 7 branches of the menorah represent the 7 Sefirot, the 7 emotional Sefirot, the 7 emotional attributes that every single person has within his soul. According to the Kabbalah, there's 10 Sefirot, 10 divine attributes through which Hashem creates the world. And we're created in the image of God, which means our soul is a reflection of those 10 Sefirot. We too have all 10 Sefirot. So we're not going to discuss the first 3. We'll discuss that we have 7 emotional Sefirot. And lighting the menorah represents igniting your emotions and connecting them to God. And that's what the menorah represents. So every day when Aaron lights the menorah, he's really lighting up and igniting the menorah, the emotional bond with Hashem. Why do you have 7 branches? Because there are 7 primary emotions. I know that there are many more emotions. Some people go through, 40 emotions in like a half an hour, right? There's not 7. But the answer is there are 7 primary emotions. And then those 7 emotions mix with each other and they create all the emotions on the spectrum of human emotion. Just like you have a few colors that now when you go into the paint store, you have thousands of shades. Yeah, it all depends how you mix the primary colors. Same things with the emotional state with the Jew. Now, we understand, if we're talking about the emotions, then there is a hierarchy. Some are holier than others. Some are holier than others. And that's why it's north to south. Some emotions are holier and closer to God than the other. Okay. Now, if you set up the emotions this way, if you're familiar a little with the Kabbalistic emotions, the one that's wet, the one that's closest, we start from the lowest to the highest. Malchut, Yesod, Hod. Let's see if I'm getting it right. Malchut, Yesod, Hod, Netzach, Tiferet, Gevura, Chesed. It's like counting backwards. It's not so easy. So Chesed, love, is the first, but that's on top of the hierarchy. Okay, so now it's 10:42. We should really close down because we're going late. We already have an idea. We already have, depending on where the menorah is standing, that's what it represents. But because I left you the suspense about the Western candle and what the Western candle is it the last candle or the second candle? So now we have a debate. What's the westernmost candle? What's the most important candle? Rambam says it's the one that's westernmost. That's chesed, kindness. Kindness, love to God is the most important emotion. Rashi says, no. The most important emotion, which is the foundation of our relationship with God, is Yesod. Yesod is a tricky emotion to explain exactly what it is. Yesod means the feeling of bonding with someone outside of yourself. If you look at the model of the 10 Sefirot with the way it's equivalent in the human body. So Chesed, Gvura, Tiferet is right hand, left hand, center. Netzach, Hod are the 2, right leg and left leg. And Yesod is the reproductive organ, because Yesod, the connection, the ability to connect and feel connected to God. I don't have to love God at this moment. I don't feel the God. I don't feel the love, but I feel the connection. That's Yesod. And according to Rashi, that's the westernmost candle. That's the proof that the Shekhinah dwells amongst the Jews. The fact that in other words, the primary emotion that we need to have to light the candles. And like Vicky says, this is the starting candle. Either they started it literally, either they actually lit from that candle, or that's where they start lighting the menorah. But the one that has to burn 24/7, that's the westernmost candle. Maimonides says it's chesed, love. Rashi says it's yesod, foundation, bonding, the ability to feel connected to somebody else, the ability to feel connected to God. That is the emotion that, according to Rashi, is the most important. So I hope we get a little bit of a taste. Like I said, there's 140 pages in the book I'm holding, only on this subject, no other subject. And you have a detailed analysis of the disagreement according to the revealed part of the Torah, the legal part of Torah, and then you have the equivalent and the explanation of how this all applies in the spiritual sense. So I hope this was enjoyable. Have a wonderful Shabbos. Anybody want to stay around for another 5 minutes for questions? Wonderful. Otherwise, hope to see you in good health. And Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Shabbos.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat
Rabbi.
Shalom, Rabbi.
Thank you so
Rabbi.
much, Rabbi.
Thank you,
Rabbi.
Yes.
Have a good Shabbos, Rabbi.
Rabbi, I had a question.
Yes.
Thank you so much. That was a beautiful. How can you squeeze it all in such limited time? But I was just wondering if anybody covered the fact that menorah wasn't glued. You can turn it and then you can cover both opinion.
Right. No, oh, this is another point. It's possible that the reason why we don't have a record is because the different periods, they did different things.
Oh,
Right?
but
We don't
but
know.
you can,
No. I'm sorry?
yeah, but you can do it not different periods in the same period because it's
Yes.
not glued. And in this case, it can represent both.
That's possible. I don't know. I don't think they would move it like every day, but it's possible that, I don't know, every generation, a new rabbi, it's theoretically possible that if they rule that it has to be one way, and then a later generation, the rabbis say, no, we take a vote and we say, no, we think it's the other way. It's possible that it was moved. You're right. It wasn't stationary. It wasn't like the building, the structure, which is set in stone. But the point here is that the spiritual equivalent, our menorah could be both both east and west and north and south, because in the spiritual sense, we can have both simultaneously.
That's what I meant, because that's the beauty of the disagreement, because they can represent both, which
Right.
both is important.
Which is
And
true about
in
every
fact,
disagreement in the Talmud. By the way, it's true about every disagreement in Judaism.
Yeah.
In reality, we have to choose A or B. But the spiritual lesson that we take from this opinion, we can do both simultaneously, because that's why the Talmud says, Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chaim. Both these and these are the words of the living God. Both opinions are true in some sense. In some setting, both opinions are true.
And in fact, they're not separate, they can be connected, because you can use the Torah wisdom to refine the Sefirot anyway.
Indeed.
Rabbi, in the picture you showed us, I'm a little turned around. I thought the picture you showed us, the menorah was north-south, perpendicular to the Kodesh Kodeshim, which is the westernmost. And I think you said, Rabbi Eliezer, you spoke as if it should be that way, but you turned it around and said east-west.
Yeah,
I'm a little confused.
I'm totally confused with the names east-west. I confused myself completely. So let's just clarify right now.
I was trying to follow you, but then I got lost.
Yeah, I kept tripping over my own words. So let me just straighten this out to get to it.
If you showed us that picture, the picture you showed us where they basically—
Right now, do you see the picture now? Is this?
Yes, that's it. That's north-south, right?
This is north-south. According to this opinion, no candle is actually closer to the west.
Correct.
Right? This is
I
west.
was following you until you said Rabbi Eliezer, and you were going to say north-south, but instead you said east-west, and then I was totally
my mistake.
confused.
I'm sorry. I kept tripping over my words. Okay.
I thought it was a test to see if we were listening.
No. It's a test to see if I could. Yeah. This is tricky, but yes, you're right. This is Rabbi Eliezer, and he says that we're referring to the Torah, and therefore all words of Torah are equally close to God, and therefore none is closer. There's no hierarchy within Torah. According to
it was
Rebbe,
Rambam who said the other.
No, so the Rambam is referring to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, which says it's north-south. So then we're talking about the 7 emotions. Within the emotions, there's certainly a hierarchy. Now the question is, what's the most important? What's the most important menorah light to burn continually? Rambam, I think, is very intellectual and believes in the power of meditation to evoke the love. He says, so what we always have to do is always feel a burning love to God. That's why the westernmost candle that always burns is the westernmost, which is love. Rashi said, not everybody can create a love in their heart, a burning feeling of love. But what you could have is yesod, foundation. What's foundation? Feeling connected. That you can always do. And that's why, according to Rashi, in the opinion of Rebbe, the Western candle is counterintuitively, not the Western, it's the second one.
And that would be in an east-west orientation.
Correct.
So Rabbi, I'm a Jew.
Yes.
As such, I see a front and a back. So
what is the front?
The front. That's exactly my question. Is there a front to the menorah?
So the front of the temple is the east, because you enter from the east. That's why the front of the temple is the east. But the catch here is that the more west you go, the more you move west, the holier you're moving. So now the question is, so we know for sure the more west I go, the holier I'm going. Mm-hmm. So let's look at this model for a second. Rabbi Eliezer, you hit the menorah, there's no one branch that's holier than the other. You see what I'm saying? because no one branch is more closer to the west than the other.
No, I understand that. What I'm
Yeah.
saying is, if you move it, I see a menorah as a front and a back.
Oh, I see what you're saying. I see
And
what you're saying.
so-
Yes.
So now,
This
when you-
way, I see what you're saying. It's a good question. Yeah, good point. Good point. I would say east to west, there's no there's no front and back would be, I guess this would be the front. You're saying whatever way we're looking at, you're saying that, let's say, for example, north to south, what's the significance of the fact that it does take up some space, which gives us both a front and a back? That's a good question. It's a good question. It seems to be that we're not, in other words, depth. You're addressing the depth. There's a depth to the menorah, which should create a front and a back. Is that what you're saying?
in a sense, when I look at my Chanukiah,
Yes.
I can turn it around so that what was the front has become the back,
Right.
which would reverse.
So when you usually have a front and a back when you have depth. So what I want to do for a second is just show you the other vessels. The other vessels of the temple have a depth, and they have a dimension to the depth. So for example, this is, I believe, 1 cubit by 1 cubit. This is 1 cubit by 2 cubits. The menorah, of course, it took up space. It was 3-dimensional. Of course, it took up space, but there is no dimension to its depth. There's no required dimension. Relative to the other vessels, it has no depth. So that's my short way of saying, I don't want to answer that question. in other words, no, I mean, I'm serious. It means that there's no significance to the depth because the Torah doesn't require a depth. There is a depth, but it's not like the Torah says it has to be a certain dimension. The depth has to be a certain size. Unlike the other vessels, both the ark and the table and the altar and the external altar, we have dimensions of depth. The menorah, there's no dimension of depth. How deep, how thick to make it? Whatever you want, right? So that's why, even though in reality, yes, there is a front and a back, which comes from depth, but we're not going to focus on that as spiritually significant because the Torah doesn't draw our attention to it.
Except for one thing.
Yes.
Again, talking about the individuality of each individual, talking about how important East and West is. If you were to take a menorah that we would claim to face in any direction, if you turned it all the way around, so you spun it 180 degrees,
yes.
Now East is West.
Correct, but you're looking at the menorah, but I'm talking about where are you placing the menorah in the context of the temple.
I understand.
Right? So we're not looking at the menorah in isolation. We're looking at the placement of the menorah in the temple and what that represents.
Yeah, I see.
So you're right. A Jew, wherever you go, you take the menorah, and we're mobile in that sense. But the message from the placement of how it's placed in the temple, that indicates what the menorah is, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
Yes, this is a lot to chew. Like I said, this is a lot of details. But what I love about this is it's a puzzle that fits perfectly. Every detail that applies in the legal side of Torah has a spiritual significance, and that's mind-boggling because not always is it explained. Not always did the Hasidic writings do all the work for us. Most times, most of it is not spelled out. That's our job. Every time you study Talmud, every time you hear two opinions, you want to ask yourself, what is the difference? What are they really arguing about? What's at stake? What's the spiritual equivalent of this disagreement? And then God will have to give you many, many years to live very long so you can study the Torah and uncover all the hidden wisdom.
Well, thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Rabbi.
Thank you. Shabbat shalom, everybody.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom. Everybody have a good Shabbat.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Too.